The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report in 2018 based on the most recent available fully processed data. It stated that greenhouse gas emissions must be reduced by 45% of 2010 levels by 2030. Since then, greenhouse gas emissions have risen. When the report was issued, we had 12 years to correct the condition. We now have 8.5. 28% of greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. are from transportation. 82% of transportation emissions come from highway transportation. www.climatechangeperformanceindex.org maintains worldwide statistics and scoring of 58 countries in 4 categories: fewer greenhouse gas emissions, utilizes more renewable energy, less energy use, effective climate policy. The U.S. ranks number 58. One of the arguments against taking climate change mitigation seriously in the U.S. is that the rest of the world must do something. The burden cannot be on the U.S. alone. The U.S. is certainly not the only offender, but the other countries whose performance we criticize still outrank us in taking on that burden. Trains are an unsung but essential climate emergency solution. The secret is in the wheels. Railroad wheels are steel on steel with a contact area the size of a dime. Highway vehicles have resilient wheels that roll on a semi-resilient surface with a contact area the size of a dollar bill. The effect is much greater friction, a good thing because that's what keeps cars and trucks on the road, but it takes more energy to move the vehicle. Rail transportation needs 1/3 the energy of highway transportation and generates 1/3 of the emissions for the equivalent transportation. High-speed rail, we often call it bullet trains, is a popular subject when rail is mentioned in the climate emergency context. While high-speed rail is beneficial, it is not a climate emergency solution for the U.S. We have 8.5 years to reduce emissions by half. The ultra-fast high-speed rail of popular discussion needs entirely new rail lines. The environmental process and permitting will take longer than the time we have. After that, there will be litigation over property acquisition and finally the construction. Started now, an effective nationwide high-speed rail network is decades away. The impression that the rest of the world rides high-speed rail is wrong. The most popular example is China. The Chinese high-speed rail system is only 28% of the Chinese rail network and represents only 54% of passenger miles traveled. The U.S. has the largest rail network of any country. U.S. railroads carry the second highest amount of freight of any country, second to China. This can be expected since the U.S. is third in the world in population and land area. U.S. railroad companies are profitable. However, measured by weight, trains carry 9.3% of the freight. Trucks carry 71.5%. Measured by value, trains carry 1.4% of the shipments. Trucks carry 73%. 3% of passenger travel is done by train. Meanwhile, in train miles per mile of track, the U.S. ranks 40th in the world, behind Malaysia and Mozambique. We can and must do better. Why are railroads so ineffective? Why are the tracks so empty? The answer is rather complicated, but it boils down to railroads are corporations. They are subject to the requirement of making the most possible money for the shareholders. That is done by limiting service to the most profitable shipments, heavy, large volume, and long distance. The part that is shipped by truck is of no interest to the industry. The U.S. government has been competing against the railroad industry for over 100 years, subsidizing highway, air, and marine transportation. Passenger rail is subsidized to somewhat below a subsistence level. usually enough to keep a little service running but letting maintenance lag. In recent years, there have been a few instances of subsidy for rail freight service, but generally, freight rail service must pay for itself. The greatest subsidies go to highways. The U.S. has been a highway-centric society for over 100 years. Highway travel, cars and trucks, is encouraged by federal and state transportation policy, including substantial subsidies. There has been a myth for many decades that users pay for highways. The rest comes from general taxes such as property sales and income tax, and from debt in the form of bonds. In general, the user fees such as fuel tax and license fees pay for about 50% of the cost of roads. Trucks are more heavily subsidized, causing 99% of the damage to highways and contributing 35% of the cost. Trucks are also provided with specialized infrastructure such as slow traffic lanes and runaway ramps on steep grades. Why not just convert to electric vehicles? The answer is still the wheels. The high friction between wheels and road, needed to keep the car from slipping off the road, causes highway vehicles to use 3 times the energy of a train. Converted to electricity, the amount of highway fuel, gasoline and diesel, burned in the U.S. is the equivalent of 83 dams the size of Grand Coulee in Washington, or 292,000 wind turbines, or 7,700 square miles of solar panels. As tires wear, toxic particles are left on the road. They subsequently are found in groundwater and streams. Tire wear material has been shown to be toxic to fish. Atomic energy was going to provide almost unlimited, almost free power with no downside in the 1950s. Decades later, nuclear waste became a problem. EV batteries will probably have a similar path from panacea to problem. Friction keeps the vehicle's tires from slipping off the road, but they're not foolproof. EVs don't cure congestion, and they don't fix the highway safety problem. The number of injuries in highway accidents is about 396% of rail accident injuries. Highway accident fatalities are about 732% of rail accident fatalities. Rail transportation is an essential climate emergency response. What we have is not effective. What do we do? We must respond like we would if we were attacked by a hostile nation, like we did during World War II. It's not a hostile nation attacking, but the effect will be like that of worldwide nuclear war if we don't stop it now. Innovation and activism. We need mode shift, moving people and shipments from road to rail as fast as we can, even before spending vast sums of money to electrify railroads. We need to look abroad to see what countries with effective rail service are doing. We need to look back at rail service that ended decades ago, like express freight trains as fast as passenger trains, and passenger trains that carry freight. We need to take a fresh look, or a look back, at streetcars and light rail, using the past as a guide to maximum utility. We need fast, frequent, convenient passenger service on existing lines, regional and long distance, before we think of building entirely new railroads for high-speed trains. The first step is to change regulations to promote innovative rail service. When the same corporation owns the tracks and the trains, and maximize profit is the only goal, the innovation needed to address the climate crisis will not happen. We must develop a way for all rail infrastructure to be operated like a toll road for trains. That will open the way for new kinds of service that the railroad companies are not interested in. We need activism. Hundreds of thousands of people telling government officials at all levels what we need. For more information, get The Climate Emergency: Trains and Effective Response at www.vtd.net.